Okay, everybody. For this class, we're going to be talking about three important terms from the text that Kierkegaard uses. So, first of all, is this term existential, used to refer to existential questions or existential reflection. So, the idea here is that the person that engages in existential reflection draws one's entire existence into one's philosophical reflection. So we're not just talking about whether or not God exists. We're not just talking about whether or not we have free will. We're not just talking about whether or not there is a mind body problem, but rather we frame those questions in terms of what does this mean for who I am? What does this mean for what I am here for? What does it mean for like what I am made of? Right? Or what does this mean for what should I believe, right? So if we come to this conclusion that God exists, well, what does that mean for me? Like, right? Should I like give God every single thing ever, or should I ignore him? And so it's kind of like what do we do in light of these philosophical questions? How do these philosophical questions and their answers, what normative requirements do they pose for me, and what should I do in virtue of them? The existential questions bring our philosophical reflections, like sort of from up, answering questions about the way that things work, right? To what it means for individuals. What does it mean for us? Okay. Next, the author talks about subjective truth. And so this can be like super ambiguous. So um we might mean something like, look, if truth is subjective, then like there is no real big T truth. Or we might mean something like, it doesn't matter what you believe. You can believe that a triangle has five sides and you're totally right about that. That's not how subjective truth is being used in this passage. And it's not how Kierkegaard thinks about it either. Kierkegaard thinks that there are objective truths, but rather he means something more like truths that are subjective rather than like subjective truth. So truths that are subjective are things like truths that are important to you, things that are important to us as individuals. So whether or not God exists is really, really important. Like, it's not just important because we're talking about a philosophical question that it would be really nice to answer. No, this is of pressing importance to the way in which we live our lives, how we can develop relationships, what it is that we should prioritize in our life, right? So the question of God's existence is not just important because it's true, but rather if it is true, it's of vital importance to the kinds of responsibilities and duties and practices that we ought to engage in as individuals, right? So this is a subjective truth, meaning that it's very, very important for us, for you. Okay. Finally, we talk about faith. And according to Kierkegaard, faith is a collection of things or an epistemic practice about things which we cannot fully know or grasp by reason or reason about. So we can distinguish the question of God's existence in two ways. There's philosophical questions about whether or not God exists. So we already talked about arguments, a couple of arguments for and against God's existence. So that kind of philosophical arguing or philosophical question about whether or not God exists, that's one thing. We use reason in that domain. we say, okay, look, if the universe has a cause, right, or if the universe exists, it has to have a cause. Um, but so we need something that's independent of the universe to have caused it. Okay, maybe that thing's God, or right, we're using this deductive argument style to come to the conclusion that God is real. Okay, so Kierkegaard says, swipe all that over to the side. That's pretty much useless. But what matters is that we have faith in God. And so faith involves this radical sort of leaping into the unknown. That's quite terrifying, he wants to say. And so what matters is not so much these philosophical questions about whether or not God exists, but what matters is that we devote ourselves to God in a way that we can't fully know ever. And as a consequence, we are acting, we are stretching our epistemic practices to just accept something that we don't have very much evidence for. And so, according to Kierkegaard, that is what's important. So, we talked about existential reflection, we talked about subjective truth, we talked about faith. If you have any questions, just send me an email.